It is so good to be together this morning. So we're in the middle of this series called Nuns and Duns, and the idea behind it is that our culture is, with increasing frequency, checking the box nun when asked for their religious preference, religious affiliation. And more than that, like many people that you know, many people that I know, had a go at church, and now they're done with it. And so we've got these nuns, we've got these duns, and the reasons for that are manifold. Like, every person has their own reason for walking away from the church, and in some way their reason's unique. But I'm not done with church. And since you're here this morning, I have to assume that you probably at least aren't quite done with it either. So we can admit to ourselves, right, as insiders, as the people who still believe in what this is, or at least are willing to hear it out, believe in what we're doing, we can admit to ourselves that church isn't perfect. There have been a number of major places where both churches, corporately, and individuals through the church have perpetuated significant harm. There have also been countless places where churches, corporately, or individuals acting on behalf or as a part of the church have committed microaggressions against people. Most of you have been hurt by the church in some way. Most of you, to some degree, have had a bad church experience. So, what I'm not here to do is to dig into the reason why people walk away from church. People don't need to explain themselves to us. I'm here to try and uncover for you the compelling picture from the gospel of what church is. Because I believe in it. I really do. I really think that the church is the most beautiful thing in the world, as it's intended to be. I believe in what the church is. I believe in what the church is functioning as it is meant to. I believe in what the church is meant to be. I think that the church is attractive in its own right. I think it's compelling in its own right. And so as we explore this question of what the church is meant to be, I think that those kind of questions, what is the church meant to be, I think those kind of questions are tricky to answer. I can answer one sense of that question pretty easily and pretty clearly. In one sense, what the church is the vehicle by which Jesus is bringing the kingdom of heaven about on earth. That's what the church is. That's the whole point. In a nutshell, the whole point of the church is it is the vehicle by which Jesus is bringing the kingdom of heaven about on earth. Us, being gathered together as a people, is the way that he's bringing about his rule on this world. This is the plan. This is the glorious, momentous plan. And so, like, he isn't assembling an army except for this army. He hasn't sent spies and ambassadors to wreak havoc on the enemy's plans, except that he has sent you and I. Jesus has promised to make all things new, and that's his mission, and we are the how. We're the how on how he's making all things new. This grand venture that started even before he was crucified and continues through today will continue till the day that death is vanquished once and for all, when the church is brought into its fullness and the kingdom is all there is. So that's what the church is. The church is the vehicle by which Jesus is bringing the kingdom of heaven about on earth. But how do we do that? Well, that is the question, isn't it? How do we do that? And it's a tricky question. There isn't a simple answer. And that's what we would expect, isn't it? There not to be a simple answer, because both logically and experientially, logically, if the church is going to tackle such a big project as restoring a world broken by sin and death to the rightful rule of the king, well, that would be a little tricky to find the perfect tool for the job. It's a complicated thing. And also experientially, because, honestly, there really isn't anything else like what we do here on a Sunday morning, is there? There really isn't anything else like what the church is. How do you explain something like this when nothing else is like it? No one else lives like we do or does what we do. And so the writers of the New Testament, they try to tackle this issue of how do we explain what the church is by presenting us with a bunch of pictures. They don't try to explain, they just present us with a bunch of images that try to capture all of the aspects of what a church is, how a church aims to be salt and light in this world. And they're compelling pictures. And so that's what we've been doing in this series. We've been taking a look at some of these pictures. Pastor Tim talked about how God is creating for himself a people, how the church is a table. And soon he'll be talking about how the church is a bride. Pastor Matt talked last week about how the church is a temple. These are images that show us part of how the church functions in the world. I want to talk about how the church is a family. So let me see Matthew 12, verses 46 through 50. Can I? Yeah, so while Jesus was still talking to the crowd, his mother and brothers stood outside wanting to speak to him. And someone told him, "Your mother and brothers are standing outside waiting for you." And he replied to them, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" Pointing to his disciples, he said, "Here is my mother, here are my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and my sister and my mother." So these words, they're interesting. I don't really think, I think probably as soon as Jesus got done saying this, he went outside and talked to his mother and his brothers. He's not just dismissing his family. In fact, I'd argue that it's because he so clearly understands what family is. It's because he has a good family that he can see, that he thinks this is a worthy picture of what the kingdom of God is. He's not dismissing his mother and his brothers. He's including us in a beautiful image. These words, Jesus is presenting a really important picture of the kingdom of God, an important concept in the gospel. He isn't saying that his birth mother and his birth brothers don't matter to him anymore, and he only cares about his co-workers in the kingdom. What he is saying is that participating side by side in his church, in his kingdom, changes the way that we relate to one another. It changes the way that we relate to one another. Our relationships as Christians are designed to be of such a quality that the closest kind of bond the closest kind of bond that can describe it is the family bond. I know that family doesn't mean the same thing to all of us. Some of us have large and boisterous families that are filled with a mixed bag of different people that we feel different levels of connection with. Some of us come from small families that are close-knit, and some of them are distant. Some of us have had good family experiences. Some of us have had bad family experiences. But I read a lot, and I've read a lot of books that have this concept of the found family motif. And the idea is that the main character is isolated for one reason or another. He doesn't have that good traditional family experience. And so maybe he's off to a boarding school, or he's orphaned or neglected for one reason or another. But the main character, he meets new friends, maybe unlikely friends. And events transpire in such a way that they become more than friends. Something I love in those kind of stories is that you can always tell. Maybe you don't have words for it. Maybe there isn't criteria that you can check off a list. But you can always tell when things shift from being friend to being family. There is something that is in us that can recognize family when we see it. I can't necessarily give you the criteria, but I think you can just tell when a relationship has taken on the qualities of a family. And so that's good news. That's good news for you and I. Because if you're feeling isolated and alone for any reason, you have a family here. You have a family here by virtue of having the same Father. You're accepted here, not because you're like me or like the person next to you, not because you fit in. You fit in because you are family. Family isn't like a friend group. It isn't, so friend groups gather together because of a common interest, or liking the same music, or hanging out in the same places. Families aren't like that. Jesus' words here, that anyone who does the will of the Father are his brother and sister and mother. The thing that holds us together is that we're about the same thing, the coming of this kingdom. where Jesus rules as the Father wills, the thing that brings us together is that we all have the same Father. Let that image of family wash over you for a minute. Family is somewhere that you belong. Family is somewhere where you are accepted, not by virtue of your choices or your interests or your personality. Family accepts you by virtue of your birth. I'm a Brown because I was born to my mother and my father, not because I do all of the same things that my father does. And I am one of you because I was born again into this thing that we call the church, into this new kingdom that Jesus is building, not because of anything I've done, but because I was born into this family. And being brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, aunts, uncles, it means that we act differently to one another than we otherwise would. Being a part of a family places certain expectations on us and the way that we relate to one another. So, if you're ever bored, just thumb through the Bible and look at the dozens of places in the New Testament where Jesus or Paul or the other New Testament voices teach us how to relate to one another. Like they use those words, one another, quite a lot. And there are just so many examples. And I'm going to look at a few of them in a few rough categories. But primarily, it falls under one big umbrella. So first off, the way that we relate to one another is we love one another. That is the category. So can I see John chapter 13, verses 34 and 35? So a new command I give to you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. This is like 3 and 2 verses of the 16 times that those words are uttered. Love one another. That is how we relate to one another. The single greatest identifying characteristic of our family is that we love one another. That is how people will know you for who you are, by loving one another. That is who we are. And we do it the way that Jesus did. The Apostle John says later in a letter, anyone who loves God must also love their brother and sister. This is what it means to be church. To love God means to be tied together as a family in love. But what does that mean for us? How do we live that out? How do we live out this experience of being a family? How do we live out this command of loving one another the way that Jesus did? Well, I think that the passages that instruct us on how we are to be with one another teach us quite a lot. So I'm going to go through a few major categories as examples, and they are just examples. But I think that they give us a feel of how we are to be with one another. And so this isn't everything that the Bible has to teach us about how to be with one another, about what it means to be members of the family of Jesus and how members of the family treat each other. But they are good examples that flesh out that image. So one major example is that it changes the way that we talk about one another. You see, I think that in most of the spheres of our lives, the way that we talk about one another can be pretty toxic, can be pretty cruel. Sometimes that's just venting our frustrations. Sometimes we pass it off as just being honest. Sometimes it's just joking around. But can I just tell you that the way that we describe the people that we love matters? The way that we talk about the people that we love matters. If you cherish the people that you love, that should come across in the way that you talk about them. I really want to bring this up because I think that this is a place where we fail each other quite a lot. And I want us to do better. Because if we want to experience the church as Jesus intended it, this is something we have to do better. So can I get Romans 12:10? I'm just going to fly through a few verses here. So Romans 12:10 says, "Be devoted to one another, and honor one another above yourselves." Honor one another above yourselves. And then next one, 1 Thessalonians 5:11 says, "Therefore encourage one another and build each other up, just as in fact you are doing. Build each other up. Romans 15:7 says, accept one another then, just as Christ accepted you, in order to bring praise to God. And then Philippians 2:3 and 4 says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. Do you see how this affects the way that we treat each other in our relationships? All of these verses have implications far beyond how we just talked about one another. But imagine if we just went so far as this. Like, look around you. Look to your left and your right. Like, being a part of the church means being committed to honoring the people that you see around you. And that certainly means more than, but not less than, honoring them with your words. It means that the words that you use with each other are words of encouragement, words meant to build one another up rather than tear down. It means accepting people, even when they aren't exactly who you want them to be. The way that Jesus accepted you, even when you weren't exactly the way he wanted you to be. It means that in our conversations, we set aside ambition and conceit. We don't say things designed to put ourselves ahead or to make us look better. It means valuing others above ourselves. Friends, do you see how freeing this could be? To feel free to trust everyone in this room to be looking out for your best interest? How much freer you'd feel, to be honest, if you trusted the people around you to accept you the way that Jesus does. To trust that when you have a conversation with somebody in this room, the response you're going to get is a response designed to build you up, a response of encouragement. Do you see how much different life can be when that's the kind of people that we are? In the conversations that people have with you, their goal will be to build you up and not to tear you down. That's what we're building here. That's what we're building here. That's what we're about. If you're on board with that, church is just the place for you, because that's what we're about. And I know that this is aspirational. I know that we're not perfect at all that. But that's what we're building. The Bible has some instruction. So this will be another rough category of the way that we relate to one another. It has some instruction on how we interact with one another when we mess up. Let's hit a few more passages here. Let's see Ephesians 4, verse 32. It says, be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as Christ God forgave you. Colossians 3:13 says, you bear with one another and forgiving one another. If one has a grievance against another, as the Lord has forgiven you, so must you also do. When we look at how the Bible instructs us to care for one another when we mess up, we find the same instruction as how we're to treat each other in the first place, to be like Christ. That is the instruction, to be like Christ. And so when people in the family mess up and it hurts you, you have the option to respond by being kind and compassionate and forgiving one another, just as Christ forgave you. And I know that being in this wacky family isn't always easy. But we can bear with each other and forgive each other. In this family, we're patient. In this family, we are free with our forgiveness. So if we're a family and the way that we interact with each other is different, like, what do we do when we're together? What do we do when we're together? Because that's an important question, right? What we're doing right now, this is kind of what we do when we're together. Pastor Tim's message last week is a good place to start. When we're together, we join together at the table. We participate in this meal that's in front of us. Part of what we do is we pass on the story of what Jesus has done and what Jesus is going to do. That's part of what we do together. Part of what we do is remember the work of Jesus. There's more that we do together. Can I see 1 Peter 4:10? Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. So this is why we're a family and not an army. We aren't in uniform. Uniform, like the word says it all, right? Like one form. We're not in uniform, all dressed the same, standing in the same posture, moving as if we're a unit. It's not how we're designed. We aren't the same. We're built to be different, different from one another, all of us. God has given each of us his grace. It's the same grace, but he's given it to us in various forms for each of us. And so, if you want to find your place in this family, find the place where being yourself benefits everyone. If you want to find your place in this family, find the place where being yourself benefits everyone. Each Sunday we come here and the hospitality team greets you when you come in with a smile and with coffee and conversation. They use their various gifts of just being kind to you, remembering your name, going out of their way to talk to you, and using the gifts that God has given them for the benefit of everyone. People that love children, love being with children, are outside this room in classrooms, ready to teach and encourage and have fun with the children in our congregation. Sean and my wife and all the wonderful musicians that we have in this congregation, they play and they sing and they lead us together in worship. Pastor Tim and Matt and I stand up here and teach. We serve as we're gifted, you and I. And what happens is a magical thing. We become something more than any of us could be individually. Like when one of us suffers, we all suffer. That's family. When one of us has, we all have. That's family. And so those are just a few things, just a taste of what we're meant to be as the family of God, just a taste of what we're building here, just a taste of what the church is. Being connected with Jesus means being in his family. It means relating to each other differently, loving well in a safe environment. And so families have homes. And that's what this is. That's what this building is. That's what we do on a Sunday morning. We are home. Home is a place that we come from and a place that we come back to. But we don't stay here. Friends, this isn't a perfect place, but it needs to be a safe place. Because none of us come into our faith knowing perfectly well how to do all of those things. None of us come into our faith knowing perfectly well how to be kind to one another and honor one another with our words. None of us come into our faith knowing well how to forgive the way that Christ forgave us. It takes time, and it takes trial and error and growth to figure out what our gifts are and how and when to share them with one another. And so, home is the place where we figure that out. Home is the place where we learn how to do all that stuff. We come together because we have to have a place to learn who we are, what we are. And so think about it. Isn't that true of you? Didn't you figure out a lot of who you are from your home, from your family? For better or worse, you learned who you were from your family. That's the way it's meant to be. That's the way it's designed. That's why Jesus uses this image in the first place. And then we go out as new people into the world, bearing the fruit of these relationships. We carry on as new people in the new world, but not alone. We're formed by our relationship with Jesus. And so Jesus entered into this relationship with us because he wants to transform us into new people. But that happens through the church. This is where that happens, because the church is the vehicle by which he's bringing about the kingdom of God on earth. Are you on board with that? This is the picture of what church is meant to be, what we're building together. Are you invested in that? We aren't always there right now, but I want to be. That's who we are, and that's where we're headed. We are family.